Hello, I'm George Wilson. Welcome to These Political Times, where I sing about and comment on the issues of the day. In this six-part series, I'll be taking a look at ex-President Trump's handling of the global pandemic. I'm calling it the case of Donald's Cunning Covid Con, for reasons that I think will become apparent as the story unfolds. And in case you've forgotten how this ends, let me warn you up front. It's not going to be pretty. Someone will make decisions that lead to hundreds of thousands of avoidable deaths. So you might want to invite any Trumpaholics, right-wing certifiables, anti-vaxxers/maskers, they seem to go hand in hand, and any other reality-challenged actors to exit now. Maybe they can go crash a truck convoy and tie up traffic. Also, because I am occasionally hit with an urge to break into song, I'll be throwing in a verse here and a chorus there whenever the mood strikes from a little ditty I penned back at the height of President Trump's rather, well, shall we say, extraordinary approach to fighting the pandemic, entitled The Ballad of Donald and COVID-19. And I'll also be taking a look at the former president's vaccine hijinks in a song I wrote especially for this series entitled When You Gonna Get a Clue. So let's get started. As I'm sure most of you recall, the coronavirus seemed to come out of nowhere. One day life was normal, the next it wasn't. For most of us, it took a while to adjust to this new reality. Lockdowns and face coverings, social distancing, travel restrictions, the list goes on. But Americans are generally a community-minded people. We prefer to be good neighbors. So following the CDC's guidelines and working together to defeat a highly transmissible, life-threatening disease, it just seemed like the sensible thing to do. That's why most Americans were so dismayed to learn that not everyone agreed. Of course, anti-vaxxers were nothing new. They've been making life difficult for parents and educators for decades with their heartfelt, if mistaken, belief, to put it kindly, that vaccines cause autism, a false claim that was long ago debunked with factual evidence. But the willful ignorance displayed by the Republican Party's freedom over life contingent, now that's a different story. These self-involved barbarians base their antisocial behavior on a harebrained reading of the Constitution that says they shouldn't have to do anything they don't want to do, even if it's for the collective good. If they're standing behind you at the grocery store and feel a sneeze coming on, why should they have to turn their heads and cover their faces? It's a free country. Same for wearing a mask or getting vaccinated or doing anything else that might help keep the more vulnerable among us safe. It takes a special kind of thoughtless schmuck to espouse such anti-neighborly nonsense. Aside from its mean-spirited viciousness, it conveniently ignores a tenet of constitutional law that's long been considered essential to living in a civilized democratic society by everyone from Abraham Lincoln to Oliver Wendell Holmes. It goes like this: your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. Or, to put it more appropriately to the issue at hand, whatever you think you're entitled to do comes to a screeching halt when it threatens my life and safety. Of course, like their role model, Donald Trump, human decency's not one of their strong suits. Instead, they engage in a kind of reverse logic in which their right to risk infection outweighs their responsibility not to spread the virus. Kind of like claiming your right to take target practice outweighs your responsibility to make sure nobody's in the line of fire. Hey, it's not your fault if they forgot to duck, right? But what no one could have predicted or even thought possible is that this pro-COVID-19 counterinsurgency would be led by the very man we entrusted to defeat COVID-19. That would be our president at the time, Donald Trump, who, with his refusal to set an example by following his own CDC's guidelines, seemed to be playing both ends against the middle. Now, you're probably thinking, wouldn't that be a conflict of interest? How could he manage the pandemic and mismanage it at the same time? Well, actually, he couldn't. So he focused on his forte, mismanagement, as we're about to see. Besides, Donald knew exactly how to deal with conflicts of interest. He just put his sons in charge. You know, those two Trump university graduates that supposedly ran Trump Enterprises while Donald was busy running the country into one of his special brand of Trump disasters, I might add. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The question before us is this. As the acknowledged leader in public health and science, why, under Trump, did the United States experience the most casualties per capita of any developed nation? And why did our president discredit and ignore the advice of our scientists and public health officials? And here's another question to ponder. Why, instead of uniting the country to fight a common enemy, did he work to turn the country against itself? Especially since it was almost immediately apparent that he was steering us toward disaster. To find out, I decided to take a look at the historical record, see what I could learn. After all, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to re-elect an idiot. Well, this is the Ballad of Donald and COVID-19. Seems he was asleep at the switch when the virus arrived on the scene. Republican anti-science playbook was his inspirational source. Say goodbye to the feds, virus early warning task force. Although scientists repeatedly warned him of the common pandemic, well, he dismissed them all and resorted to his usual fake news polemic. Even when thousands of Americans started dying, well, he stuck to his perverse, it's a hoax, reality falsifying. Now, when the virus first hit, most Americans were initially confident that the highly respected U.S. public health system would know exactly what to do to keep Americans safe. After all, we led the fight against other dangerous viral outbreaks like SARS and Ebola and even AIDS. Unfortunately, as it turned out, it didn't know what to do. Well, it did, but it didn't. It all had to do with who was in charge at the time and who he was listening to. And obviously, the person in charge at the time was our 45th president, Donald John Trump. And the person he was listening to was that noted authority on all things scientific, Donald John Trump. That's right, not the head of the CDC, not the Surgeon General, not the chair of the coronavirus task force, not even Dr. Anthony Fauci, recognized as the top infectious disease expert in the United States. Unfortunately, as the pandemic wore on, most Americans came to believe President Trump was listening to the wrong guy. In fact, in survey after survey, as many as 2/3 of respondents said the president failed to act quickly enough when he first learned of the virus. It was almost as if he thought if he ignored it, it would go away. After all, it is invisible. A high percentage of respondents also said they didn't believe they could trust anything the president had to say about the virus. Nothing, not a single word. Of course, those were the days, if you recall, when he was telling us he'd be gone by Easter. Now, why is that nobody believed him? And why have both scientific and medical communities uniformly taken the position that the Trump administration's actions, instead of helping, actually made things worse? Some critics even claim he mismanaged the government's response on purpose, intentionally. Now, why would he do such a thing? What could possibly be his motivation, if indeed it's even true? To get some answers, I decided to start at the beginning. What exactly qualified this thin-skinned businessman and thrice-married television personality to lead our pandemic response in the first place? How did the American people come to put their trust in someone known for his mendacity and who frequently behaved in public like a petulant child? A man who had been accused by 24 different women of sexual improprieties and whose businesses consistently teetered on the brink of financial ruin. Equally perplexing, what did they see in a candidate who had never shown even a scintilla of interest in public service? Oh, well, there was that full-page ad he took out in his despised New York Times to try to get some young Black and Latino teenagers executed for a rape they didn't commit, even after they'd been found innocent, after having served several years in prison, and in keeping with Donald's constitutional inability to ever admit when he's wrong, he still refuses to this very day to retract his position. But other than that, if you were to scour the literature, you'd quickly discover that he never knowingly did anything for anyone, anywhere, any place, any time, that didn't benefit Donald Trump or Trump Enterprises or All County Building Supply and Maintenance. Huh? What? Oh, I know. You're probably wondering about that last one, All County whatever. Aside from being a real mouthful, what the heck is it, right? Well, there's a reason you had to ask. After all, Donald wasn't exactly eager to tell the world about the shell company he had created so he could cheat, allegedly, on his income taxes. But much to Donald's great annoyance, that same New York Times that he so willingly advertised his unsolicited opinion in thought we ought to know. No wonder he hates them so. Fake news, right? Naturally, Donald preferred the fiction he'd spent years promoting, that he was the shrewdest businessman on the planet, a consummate dealmaker, despite experiencing one financial setback after another. Either he'd get himself in trouble with regulators, or, shrewd businessman that he is, he'd find himself overextended financially. To name just a few of his more unsavory regulatory run-ins, he was fined $750,000 by the FTC after he illegally maneuvered to buy up casino stock. He ripped off countless people with his fake university before the courts forced him to shut it down. Gee, I hope that didn't invalidate Eric and Don Jr.'s degrees. And likewise, he was ordered to shut down his family charity when it turned out the primary beneficiary of the Donald Trump Foundation was none other than, wait for it, Donald Trump. And then there was the time he got himself sued by the federal government for racially discriminatory practices in what was described at the time as one of the most significant race bias cases ever. Wow, what a distinction. That must be why he claims he's the best thing that ever happened to the blacks, as he likes to refer to them, as if they're some kind of objectified other, not like his people, but a conveniently pigeonholed group whose members all think and act alike and are only to be dealt with when you need their votes. As for his financial setbacks, as you've probably heard, he was forced to declare bankruptcy count 'em, 6 times. Now, that's kind of ironic, considering he supposedly wrote one of the best-selling business books of all time, The Art of the Deal. In truth, it was actually ghostwritten by journalist and author Tony Schwartz, who says he had to make the contents up when he couldn't get Trump to focus on the subject. Must have been too busy running around making all those deals, right? Now, Schwartz says the book should be reclassified as fiction. Which makes sense, considering our great deal maker almost always overpaid for his great deals, which may explain why they rarely turned out to be so great. And bankruptcy's not just some harmless legal maneuver either. Let's acknowledge that straight up. Trump's business failures have taken their toll over the years on countless working-class people and small business owners who either never got paid or, in the case of many of those small business owners, were forced out of business. But of course, true to form, Trump would unfailingly manage to escape with all his assets intact. No matter how dreadfully he screwed up, no matter how incompetent his mismanagement proved to be, he'd just hit that bankruptcy escape hatch and make his getaway, landing on his feet every time, while leaving his victims to twist in the wind. And even when he didn't have to declare bankruptcy, he'd often just refuse to pay his subcontractors. Strong-arming the little guy was one of Trump Enterprises' most lucrative profit centers. Oh, sometimes he'd pay them without a major hassle, But that tended to happen only if they agreed to accept less than he'd originally, contractually, promised to pay. Now there's a man of his word, practices that well-known tough kitty philosophy, you know, as in, but it's damn good milk. Only in Donald's case, that would be 100% luxuriantly thick, fully saturated, whole-fat cow's milk, fit for a classy man of Donald's generously ample stature. Of course, I mention all of this only as background to help explain the nature of the man. What qualities make up his character? What drives him? Maybe by delving a little deeper into his background, we can gain some insight into how he could ever even have conceived of some of those twisted pandemic policies he put in place. Well, first he declared all the scientists and doctors were wrong, before claiming he knew it was a pandemic all along. Well, if he'd known, asked the reporter, why didn't he act instead of answering the question? He turned red and blew his sack. Well, he accused the entire press corps of being liars and fake, as if he could care less whether anyone died or ate cake. Besides, he said, this coronavirus is no worse than the flu. Come April, when the weather gets warm, it'll wash. I say wash. Some don't like that word. Right on through. Ah, yes. Now, let's face it, Donald was never destined to get along with the press. After all, he expects reporters to tell the world how fabulous he is, whereas reporters are required to try to ferret out the truth, as in facts. You know, those inconvenient little bits of objective reality with which Donald has yet to acquaint himself. Whenever he's confronted with one, he merely dismisses it with a wag of his tongue. How does that work? Easy. It becomes what? Repeat after me. Fake news. Which probably explains why, when it comes to misrepresenting your accomplishments, nobody does it better than Trump. In fact, by the time he'd assumed his starring role in The Apprentice, all those screw-ups and bungled deals were forgiven, as in forgotten, at least by Donald. For by then, he was actually claiming, right there in the opening credits of every Apprentice episode, to be the largest real estate developer in all of New York. Of course, the reality was quite different. He not only wasn't the largest, he wasn't even in the top 10. Like I said, when it comes to creating a mountain of BS, nobody outshovels Trump. But then Donald's never let the truth stop him now, has he? He's spent a lifetime practicing the autocratic creed. Repeat your lie often enough, and people will start to believe it. Heck, he told one lie about his border wall 87 times. In fact, as I'm sure you've already heard, and I hate to keep bringing this up, but it's just such a collective slap in the face to each and every one of us, every American. But Donald Trump is so committed to inventing his own reality that he told more than 30,000 documented lies in his single 4-year presidential term. Wow, that's like 7,500 lies a year. I'd say he lies like a rug, but Donald can lie standing up or sitting down or even in his sleep. Let's face it, the sky's the limit when you're the most prolific liar of your time. What a shining example he must set for American youth. Can't you just hear little Johnny's daddy now trying to explain why he voted for Trump? Yeah, geez, son, I just love how he lies to me. It keeps me guessing. It's like that game show, To Tell the Truth. Did he really win the 2020 election in a landslide? Did he really help out at Ground Zero on 9/11? Is it really true that he's a very stable genius? And does that mean he really does have a very, very big brain? Gee, that must be why he's got such a big head. Oh, and is it really true that his management of the coronavirus was very, very fabulous? All lies, son, but ain't it fun? By now, you're probably wondering, How did someone so professionally inept and utterly truth-challenged come to be in charge of the U.S. government at such a critical time in our nation's history? Believe me, theories abound. For some answers, be sure to check out Part 2 of Donald's Cunning Covid Con, wherein I explore that very question. Just keep checking back to find out when it's up and running, or better still, click on the subscribe button. That way I can let you know as soon as it's released. Oh, and don't forget to click on that thumbs up like button so I can keep bringing you my take on these political times. See you next time.